How long did it take you to kinda create this new version of yourself and give you the confidence to, you
Yeah,
know,
so
make this all
so one of the things that really well, let's just before we say that, a lot of people have an identity that they work within, and it kinda limits them, right?
Mhm,
So, we all have sentences we say or think such as like, "Oh, I don't dance.
mhm,
Um, I'm a vegan. I'm a Republican. I think this, I'm this way." And some of them are fictions. Some of them are just little stories we kinda tell ourselves of who we are,
mhm,
and we kinda wanna, like, live within it. And that's the first thing that you need to realize about yourself. If you ever want proof of this, as a social experiment, go to another city or another country and create a brand new identity just for fun. Say something
mhm,
like, instead of being I know this because I used to play this game. I would date girls in Bakersfield and then take them to Vegas and I say, "Hey, let's tell everyone that we meet that, we're getting married and I met you uh I met you at a Hello Kitty store." And we make up these stupid things. And what's interesting is we would create these new personas and we'd act within them. And it was suddenly I wasn't shy about certain things because I was pretending to be someone, right? So we all
mhm,
have an identity that we work within. And one of the things that I did that was a little unique was when I created the name David Bond, it was originally something I did just because I had to make a YouTube channel to upload videos to share, and I didn't want to use my real name,
mhm.
right? In addition to that, Facebook, I didn't like using my real name on Facebook because my coworkers would always find me, and then like my general manager would be like, "David, why didn't you accept my friend request?" And I'm sitting there like, do I have to? I'm just thinking like, ugh, it was so awkward to say no. So I had to say yes, but then I couldn't post anything. And so I was like, I'm just gonna delete my Facebook and make a new one.
Mhm.
So I thought David Bond was funny. I was like, oh, like it would be like the James Bond version of
Yes,
me.
you take my
That was
money.
kind of like my idea.
Mhm,
But when I started to post as David Bond on forums, because I had this kind of like no one knew who the real me was, I kind of felt permission to kind of talk a little different and act a little different.
Ryan, the Eating Warrior, 9.99 super chat. He says, "I plan on taking a trip back to the Philippines in a few months. I too would like a harem of Filipinas, LOL. What's the difficulty level on that? Any tips? I've been married to a Filipina before."
Yeah, yeah, I can I can answer that. Do you want me to answer that or should we just
Yeah, yeah, you
continue?
wanna answer it? Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I plan to take a to be honest, it actually is kinda difficult. Filipino girls are incredibly jealous and very possessive, and there's a lot of gossip. It's a bit of an uphill battle, and the biggest aspect is, finding the types of girls who would even agree to it, and that's really the biggest part. If you're able to run high volume if you're able to run enough volume, you can find anybody. Like, I'm sure if I was had a higher budget on my Facebook ads, I could probably get a harem of girls with, like, 1 arm. But it's just like you need the volume, you know what I mean? You need the reach and the volume to even find them. So,
Mhm,
that's the short answer. Um, yeah, so whenever I was doing this David Bond thing, I found myself just acting a little different, talking a little different, and I eventually got a reputation as David Bond in on the Facebook groups.
mhm,
And what I found myself doing is, like, I kinda had fun with this idea of David Bond as a character that wasn't me. The thing was, the David Bond character was the person I really wanted to be. That was
mhm.
the version I really wanted to be,
Yeah,
right?
your own Tyler Durden.
Yeah, that was the real in a way, it always was the real me.
Mm,
And because I gave it a second name and I it was like, "Oh, it's" you know, the and what ended up happening was, once I quit the job, I had no punishment for being not David Bond. I was like, "Well, I'm in a brand new country, like, no one knows I used to work at a carrot factory and was 200 pounds. I could be anybody." And so I started to act like the version of this character that and then the thing was, as I started to act that way all the time, I kind of just tipped into it where, like, now I am that. And there was all these decisions I would face myself with where, like, there'd be a girl, like, and I'll be way too scared to talk to her, and then I would have this thought, like, "Bro, like, what would David Bond do?" And I was like, "Oh, I know what he would do," and I would go through. And
Mm,
that little psychological thing that I had accidentally stumbled upon is what I call identity hacking.
mm,
So, this is a term that that I call it, where you effectively create a third, or you create a second identity that you act through. And I wanted to make a presentation on this for my program, the Millionaire Social Circle. And during the research for this, I was kind of like looking at my old chats and my old pictures. And I remember thinking about the Tyler Durden thing. And I was like, it's kind of like Tyler Durden. And I thought, you know what? It's kind of like Neo. And then I just started going down the list. I'm like, there's actually a lot of interesting pop culture references to this concept of an alter ego that you work through, that you act through. And so I thought, you know what? This is kind of cool. Maybe I could teach this to my students. What is your Tyler Durden? What is your 2.0? And so that's kind of the premise of this. And what's really interesting about it is all of this is a little psychological trick. It's self-talk, whatever, but it's powerful because when you stop thinking, what would I do? And you start thinking, what would external third person character do? We all
mhm,
know. We all know the answer. You ever notice how easy it is to give people advice, but how hard it is to give yourself advice?
mm,
If someone's like, "Oh, I'm having this problem," you're like, "Let me give you advice." Do you ever take your own advice for yourself? It's a little harder, huh? At least for me.
right.
It's like you have a friend that's struggling with weight, and it's so easy to go, "Oh, well, you should stop doing this." Then you ask yourself, "Well, am I doing that for myself?" Well, sometimes I don't, right? Once you externalize the identity as like this character, you start to think like, what would he do? What would he act? How would he talk? And it's for whatever reason, it just seems to lift the burden of that. And so it kind of what's really going on is it's a question of like, well, if if I say, "Oh, I'm not David Bond, I'm this." Well, why am I that?
Mhm,
Why do I what even is the real me at all? And why don't I believe I have control as much as I think?
mhm,
One of my roommates is Indian, and one of the biggest challenges he had was growing up with Indian parents in India is getting rid of all the mental blocks of believing in what's called a caste system.
right.
So, in India, they have a caste system. They have all these narratives. Or another example is some Asian countries, the association with dark skin being that you're poor.
Right.
There's all there's all kinds of things, excuse me. There's all kinds of self-talk, self-identity things that are like chains that keep us in a certain way.
Right.
And so when you unplug and you think, okay, instead of asking like, what should I do? What do I do? Create a character. What's your superhero version that doesn't give a fuck about his upbringing? Whatever that is, that's probably the version that you deep down really would like to be.
Mhm.
I mean, really think about why are the James Bond movies so cool? Is because we get to watch a guy that is what all of us kind of wish we would be. But
Right.
what's really stopping you from being a closer version to that?